All right, the webinar is now live. We're recording. Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to Leadership Foundation's Town Hall meeting. It's been a while since we've been together. You know, our time is about convening thought leaders and practitioners who will inspire us to do great work in the cities across the world. I'm Cornelius Williams. I'm one of your co-hosts, along with Dave Hillis, who is our president of our global office, and we are so glad to be back. Welcome back, welcome back, welcome back. Woo-hoo! And so, hey, before we go on with our time, here, let me just open this up in a word of prayer. I'll be reading, Precious Lord, this day, I join you in agreeing with your prayer outlined in John 17. Your desires for followers to become one heart and a mind. Just as you and the Father are one, may we be of one heart and one mind. May the world believe that you, in fact, were sent by the Father because of our unity. May the glory you've been given by the Father rest and abide on us so that we will be unified, and together you and the Father will be made known. I pray that we would mature in this oneness and give the godless world evidence that you have come and that you love them in the same way that you were loved by the Father. It is my hope and prayer that our time today would help this prayer become a reality across this world. We commit this time to you and ask all this in your name, Jesus. Amen. Well, everyone, it's been a while since we've been together. We have a great lineup for you today. We'll get a chance to hear from our new friend, Ernest Brooks, from Isaac Miller, and Nahshon Nicks out of First Coastal Leadership Foundation in Jacksonville, Florida. And so, welcome back to Zoom. Most of us have used Zoom, so you know kind of some of the protocols associated with that, so we won't pause to kind of go through some housekeeping. You can see here, if you have questions, we have a chat box. Please drop any questions you might have in the chat. If you need to raise your hand, do so. We'll have a Q&A time later on, but you know, most of us during COVID have used like Zoom. We've upped our accounts, and so we'll move on. So thank you. Okay, so Dave, so it's actually kind of great. You know, we've been together, we haven't been together in a while. I've talked to Dave offline, and for those of you that may be joining us for the first time, what we've tried to do during our town hall meetings is kind of revisit our values and the principles that inform the way we go about our work all over the world through Leadership Foundations. And Dave and I have kind of opened that up, and we've seen that has been, a great value add. And I say that not only as the facilitator, but also as the president. We've seen how this conversation has actually strengthened the work, and we want to kind of continue that. We're changing up our format here, in that we're going to kind of approach a conversation for the next 5 weeks. And so one of the things that we've kind of learned is how some of our values have informed some things, but it got me to thinking about this. Dave, as we look at all of our values, which have been helpful, and I'm a less is more, I'm a minimalist in my life. And so I'd be curious to know if maybe there was a word or phrase that you could kind of sum up all of our values in for people here with us today.
You're kind of putting me on the spot, Cornelius, to find one word. But interestingly enough, this comes out of some history for me. I think most people know that one of the things that I did back when I was running the Northwest Leadership Foundation and had the chance to find myself under the wonderful kind of tutelage of Dr. Ray Bakke. My particular passion was to do some work on the theology of leadership foundations. One of the things that I noticed, of course, was that we were a spectacularly oral organization. Everybody had a story about something significant, but as best as I could tell, nobody had ever written anything down. So, however inadequate I felt, I was motivated to begin to try to write down what was this charism that began in Dr. Samuel Shoemaker, and then, of course, went to Reed and went to the rest of us. So I had a chance to essentially kind of read the 32 books, roughly, that Sam wrote in his life. I had a chance, of course, to talk with Reed continually, look at some of the things that he had written as well. What was a surprise, and I would almost move it to a place of you know, and again, people forgive me for this, but maybe a bit of an epiphany, was that there was one word that kept coming up over and over and over again. And it took on different shades, it took on different nuances, different textures, but in the end, the word was reconciliation. And I think this notion that we find it probably most clearly articulated by St. Paul in 2 Corinthians 5, where you get the very real sense that St. Paul is trying to put his head and his heart around what is this ministry that has been given to him and given to others by God. And I at least read 2 Corinthians 5 as, you know, Paul getting ready to kind of make just a really big list, you know, of different characteristics, different things that describe. But he ends up saying, basically, we have been given the ministry of reconciliation. And one of the things I would just highlight real quickly is that, you know, we oftentimes talk about ministry, that one of the aspects of ministry is reconciliation. But I think a fair reading of Paul suggests, no, ministry is reconciliation. There's no other, you know, manifestation, no other way to articulate ministry than if it is in the business, if it's not dealing with this idea of reconciliation. So that I think is really significant. And for me, at least, working with the leadership foundations, all of our values, I think even the vision itself of seeing the city as God's playground, it really, I think, embodies, internalizes this ministry of reconciliation.
Well, Dave, how would, you know, I got to go back and I wrote that down. It's, man, kind of, how would you define it though? Right. So I appreciate it, Paul, but how would we talk about it?
Yeah, without getting too kind of theologically nerdy on people, I mean, just there's an interesting thing that Paul does. The original word for reconciliation it's called dialasso, and what dialasso effectively initially was an economic term. So in other words, you know, we were dialassing, Cornelius, if you gave me something for what I paid for, right? So it was really, I think, to kind of move things together and have a kind of exchange. Paul initially grabs this word, but he then moves it or migrates it to a word that's a little bit of a turn on it, and he grabs a hold of catalasso. And what catalasso means is that, yes, there's an exchange, but it's not two-way, it's only one way. So that reconciliation for Paul was just simply this idea about bringing something together that had been separated. And it was initially and ultimately God's responsibility. So there's two or three things that I think kind of happen that are practical, you know, for leadership foundations moving forward. I think one is this notion, and I'm going to use kind of 3 Ps here for everybody to kind of remember. But the first is this idea that reconciliation has a prime mover, and it's God. So in other words, ultimately, what we don't do with reconciliation is accomplish anything. We just simply receive it. In other words, it's an act that has already taken place. And so I think for Leadership Foundations, as we are out doing work, one of the things that we want to be very mindful of is that, this is not something we have to create a program for or write an initiative or, we would all love to get funded, but get funding for. This is a work that God has already done, and our job as Leadership Foundations is to receive it. The second is what I would describe as penitence. I think one of the things that Paul intuitively understood is that if this reconciliation was real, right, if it took a hold of who we are, the immediate effect was that you began to move into this old, kind of Christian word of penitence, right? A recognition of where I have fallen short of this unbelievable gift that has been given by way of reconciliation. And then the third piece of it that again is nuanced in Paul, but is that it will then begin to move you out of penitence to begin to look at what I would describe as the power structure. In other words, right, we are unreconciled more often than not because of the use of power, or maybe even more accurately, the abuse of power. But what reconciliation begins to move you towards is, okay, who has the power? And how do we begin to reimagine it? And I think the last thing I would just say, again, not to kind of do a Bible study here, but it's important, I think, for everyone to recognize the sequencing of that. I think oftentimes what happens in reconciliation is we jump over penitence and try to ask the power question, right? Who's got it? Who doesn't? Where's equity? What does that look like? And that's absolutely critical. But I think if you try to deal with equity, if you try to deal with power apart from a penitent spirit, both individually and corporately, you're going to get into, I think, some very difficult, and I would even go so far as to say intractable positions, where it's a zero-sum game, right? That I only win if you lose. You only win if I lose. And I think that's a dead-end street. And so, when we think about this theme here over the next 5 weeks about how do we heal this fractured world, I sense, at least in this idea of reconciliation as ministry, that we recognize its gift as primarily from God, that it moves us to penitence, and that ultimately then and only then can we begin to deal with the practical issue of, okay, power, who's got it? How do we begin to reimagine it on behalf of the least, last, and the lost?
So, I feel like I'm in class. Okay, hey, Mr. Hillis, I have another question. One of the things that is fascinating and humbling, Dave, about that is, one, if you don't start with the first P, you can truly be, as you said, overtaken by the last one. You really,
Absolutely.
And I never thought about it in that sequence. And so as I think about equity, look, we'll have to explore some more of this, because I'm curious as to how we move through those P's. Again, I remember as you were talking on the second one, where the statement would say, get away from me, for I am, have iniquity. When you were in the presence of power, the Almighty, when Jesus, it just causes one to prostrate.
In fact, I think, Cornelius, just to kind of maybe tease this out to our participants, one of the things I think you and I'll do here over the next 4 weeks now is begin to talk about different biblical pictures of what this process looks like. So in the person of Peter, in the woman at the well, what this looks like in the book of Philemon, because one of the things that's, I think, a great treasure of the scripture is that it gives us different examples. It gives us different images of the way this process works itself out.
Okay. Well, I'm looking forward to that. Which, especially as we try to address inequity and trying to heal our fractured world. And so today, everyone, I'll say this to you all, especially in light of all that's going on in our world. I was reading some different things that were taking over in Nigeria. I wouldn't say to you, hey, invite a friend, invite a member of your staff, invite a partner. If there are others that you're serving alongside who you'd love to be involved in this conversation as we look at healing a fractured world, reconciliation, I would just say invite them, because I do think in the spirit of John 17 that the Lord wants us to receive it. Is that right, Dave? Receive it.
Yeah.
Right. That's first. Yep. Let's receive it. And so the more people receiving it, the better that we can go about making it a reality. And so, which brings us to our guest today. As we're looking at this idea of how do we receive, how do we recognize and ask for forgiveness and then approach power in a way that honors God. I've been having conversations around the inequity in leadership in the nonprofit sector. And so Jonathan and I had a chance to meet our guest today. His name is Ernest Brooks. And Ernest is a senior associate with Isaacson Miller. And prior to joining them, Ernest, he served as the president and CEO of the Academy of Preachers Incorporated, which is a national ecumenical professional development organization for clergy affiliated with the Lilly Foundation. He also served as special assistant to the CEO of the Martin Luther King Center for Nonviolent Social Change, was a higher ed fellow for the Graduate Diversity Initiatives at the University of Chicago, and an assistant dean at the Martin Luther King International Chapel of Morehouse College, and has served in many other roles as long as being a pastor. And so Jonathan and I were talking to Ernest and thought that it would be great to have him as a guest, as we are really trying to figure out how do we continue to look at bringing healing and bringing equity to leadership. And so, Ernest, won't you come on screen? And so, Ernest, I kind of sent this to you, and on the heels of what Dave was saying around reconciliation, I spent a lot of time thinking about inequity, and I would be curious to know kind of how you perceive this relationship between reconciliation and equity. If you could
Certainly.
Just share a little of your thoughts. Yep.
Thank you for the question, Cornelius, and thank you to you and Jonathan and Dave and others associated with the Leadership Foundations and Propel for the invitation. I also want to thank my good friend and longtime colleague Roy Kraft, who I know is on the video and associated with Leadership Foundations, for facilitating this introduction. That background, I think, is important because those relationships and the people that I named and the web of connections is emblematic of this conversation around reconciliation and equity. As I think about my relationship with Roy in particular, which is long-standing, started as when I was a student at Morehouse, and he was a leader in Atlanta and a volunteer with our chapel there at Morehouse, and continued throughout the years to us becoming colleagues and very dear friends, working together in many different areas. He joined the board of directors during my time leading the Academy of Preachers, and that relationship of a young African-American male and a seasoned and experienced white male leader operating in spaces both in predominantly African-American environments and predominantly white environments, and religious spaces, non-religious spaces, and us sharing our experience, our perspective, our webs of relationship to both support one another and to support the organizations and the missions that we're committed to, I think is a great example of what I think reconciliation, or really conciliation, look like in practice. And I make the distinction between reconciliation and conciliation because I think, reconciliation is this notion of bringing together again. And while that's true in the macro sense, on an individual level, we're talking about coming together and being in relationship with one another, period, often for the first time. And so with that frame, I'll say that I thought a lot about this question when you posed it, because I haven't always had a positive reaction to the term reconciliation, to be quite honest. And I think that's probably shared among many from my background and perspective, as an African American male born in the rural South, growing up in a space where there was racial integration, as we term it, in the 80s and 90s, that was there and that was genuine, but there was also separation, and you knew where those lines were. Going to graduate school, to divinity school, and studying religion, and thinking through these notions of reconciliation, particularly from a Christian theological perspective, often would seem Pollyannish, contrived, manufactured, and didn't reflect my experience of life on the ground. And so my experience and relationship to both the term and the school of thought has been complicated, and I think that it's important to acknowledge that. But I think as I have lived and engaged in this work, I understand that what we call reconciliation is really creating the space to build and nurture genuine relationships. And I think, we have to embrace that simple reality that reconciliation is about creating the space for people from different backgrounds, from different experiences, to get to know one another, to be in relationship with one another. And out of that relationship comes opportunity, comes understanding, comes mutuality. But those relationships are ends in and of themselves. And I think that the challenge has been when we have instrumentalized those relationships under the banner of reconciliation, to see them as means to an end. And so now building the relationships, becomes a tool in our toolkit to get to some desired end. And when you enter into a relationship that is an instrument of some greater, goal, purpose, it often becomes contrived, not balanced, one-sided, artificial, and you don't have genuine relationship. You have connections of mutual benefit, and those are different. And so that's what I would say about reconciliation. And then I think we can get to this conversation around equity and equality.
Ernest, I think that was a beautiful articulation. I think I know Leaders Foundations have heard this before, but I've always been struck by something that Thomas Aquinas said now over a millennium ago, where he said that all evil in the end comes down to a confusion of ends and means. And I think you just articulated that when relationship is a means rather than an end is when things really begin to get, I think, kind of wonky for all of us. So I think then within that, what I would be really curious to know is what helped you or what contributed to you being able to see relationships as an end rather than a means to an end?
I think for me, that has only happened, I shouldn't say only, I think that it often happens in the context of stepping back from the expectations and obligations of larger aims and goals, and valuing the interaction and getting to know individuals in and of themselves. Often, we get to know people through our environments. And so whether that's through school, our work, our professional associations, our religious institutions, and often the context for us being introduced to someone and getting to know someone is in the context of wider aims and goals, our broader work together. We're being brought together to work on a project. We're studying together. We are, getting to some goal. And I think that the challenge is to be able to step back from that broader picture, from that work, and ask, who is this person, what do I value? How do we get to know each other as people, both within our work together and outside of our work together, and begin to invest in a relationship that transcends the tasks or the goals with which you've set out to accomplish. And I think the reality is that there's sometimes you build relationships and those relationships are in service to the project or the end that you're working on, and they don't necessarily have a shelf life beyond that, or they aren't as vibrant or engaged, and that's okay. I think it's okay to acknowledge that. But I think it's also important to seek out and to invest in relationships that transcend the transaction of the relationship. And in either case, acknowledging that and being aware of that, I think is critical.
Hey, Ernest, thank you. Thank you. Man, I'm sitting here as I'm listening to you. I would say most of us on this call are presidents of leadership foundations around the world. And the others are board members or friends who serve in these capacities. And so, I think Jonathan and I said that 50% of our leadership of our presidents are people of color. Now, a small percentage are women. So we definitely have some work to do in terms of reflecting our world. But as leaders, how do we help create that culture that's not transactional? Mm-hmm. Like, we're committed to raising up and investing in leadership. And so there is a means to our end. Absolutely. And what we're doing. And yet what I hear you saying is, but we can't lose sight of the relationship. And so what would you say to leaders that are trying to get somewhere, but not miss the very people in front of us?
Sure. I think that's a very good question. And that's one that we all wrestle with. I think, in my work, we certainly wrestle with that as we're engaged in, transactions with people and organizations. But I think that one, it relates to the genuineness of the individual. I think that people can very quickly tell when you are interested in them and who they are as a person, their story, seeking to understand them, even if that engagement is in the context of of a professional relationship or a broader mission. You can tell the difference between someone who genuinely wants to know you and work with you and someone who is just seeking out how to accomplish this objective with you as an agent there. And so I think that's one, is just the genuineness of the individual spirit or heart or soul, personhood. And I think two is being very attentive to mission at multiple levels. I think as organizational institutional leaders, especially as board members and CEOs, when we're thinking about strategy and aligning programs and operations with goals, we like to think of ourselves as mission driven, as mission aligned, from an external facing perspective. And often our internal mission is whatever it takes to serve that external mission. And I would challenge organizational leaders to think about your internal mission, not just in terms of accomplishing your external benchmarks or aims and goals, but an internal mission that is related to organizational culture, that is related to people, that is just as important. Who do you want to be as a community? Who do you want to be in relationship with one another within this space, with people who walk into your building or come into your community, and to be as committed to that internal mission as you are to the external facing or programmatic mission of the organization.
Yeah, I think that's just absolutely excellent. I think the old adage that the culture of an organization eats the strategic plan for lunch, I think can't be said enough. I think within that, Ernest, one of the things that on a very practical level, I'm curious to have you reflect on is, what are some of the practices that an organization can make use of to ensure that they are, in fact, fueling, building up that culture internally that can then push itself externally?
Sure, that's a good question, and I think you know, in the spirit of you know, of the faith that underlines the work of those on this call. You know, we are all pressing toward the mark, and none of us are there yet, and we're learning by trial and error, and probably sometimes more defeats than victories, and myself included. I think you know, some practical approaches are one, having conversations or meetings, even if you have to schedule them, that are not business related in terms of a program or agenda or an execution, but convening, whether it's an entire team or small groups, to really, you know, talk about who you are. You know, they can have, you know, prompts or framing, you know, and not just as an icebreaker before you dive into the business meeting. There again, you're getting into the instrumental aspects of it, but creating opportunities to genuinely engage with one another, with people as teams. And I think every organization is different, you know, in this regard. When you get into the nuts and bolts of how you institute organizational culture, you know, for some organizations, you know, that may mean, you know, flexibility in, you know, individual employees being able to devote, you know, some time and effort to a cause they care about. Although, you know, these are the kind of, that's the kind of low-hanging fruit in our current environment. What I think I'm thinking of is not so much those type of things as the culture that creates a space where people feel like they are genuine people in the environment and feel like they can bring themselves to the table and can be natural and engaging. And so I think it's specific to the institutions and to the environment, but I think having space to engage mentally, psychologically, emotionally, beyond just the work product becomes very important. I would say also, you know, it's creating communities and cultures of both trust and accountability. And so, you know, and I think that's a tension. And I think you know, we do pretty well on the accountability side of seeing where gaps are, of, you know, of holding people accountable. I think where we don't often do as well as leaders is on the side of trust. You know, which involves, you know, grace, which involves genuine relationship, understanding, creating a culture of transparency where people can make mistakes and be willing and free to, you know, to own and share those mistakes without fear of, you know, of reprisal or repercussion that is unwarranted. And so I think, you know, these are the type of things that are, these are the intangibles. You know, when you're sitting around, you know, the table in the morning, you know, having coffee or having lunch, and getting to know people, then when you come back later in the day and you're having to address some issue, there's a different engagement because of the relationality that was established, especially when that relationship was not just instrumental in the sense of it being something manufactured because you read a report that says that, you know, if you have coffee with people for 15 minutes a week, then it increases productivity by 18%. You know, I think, you know, that's when you get into the, I mean, that may be true, but that can't be the basis for these kind of culture shifts.
Well, hey, there's a couple of questions, Nahshon, that we definitely want to allow the group. I do have one other one that if, depending on how long it goes, that I want to pick your brain about. But go ahead, Carrie.
Great. Well, thanks so much. We've got a lot of activity in the chat, which is great. First question for you, Ernest, is coming in from Therese, and she's just asking about any practical tools that you would recommend that you've come across in your work.
Sure. I think a couple, and here again, there are a plethora of these. You know, I think, you know, one is opportunities for, and these are simple things that I think many people do within organizations, but opportunities to be able to share feedback, you know, in a safe space is one. Celebrating, we often celebrate wins and losses in terms of our professional work. And so talking about what we've done over the last week or 2 weeks, I think one is to begin to celebrate and to share wins and losses beyond just the professional workspace. And so, even as a manager or leader, creating space where you can, share with the teams or share with others, what's going on in your world beyond, your professional life, and showing some vulnerability there, I think, is modeling that for others. And I think the key is, once you begin to do these things, you have to be willing to genuinely go there, and to go all the way. You can't set up this space and then pull back, because it's uncomfortable, or not be willing to truly show up in times of need for friends and colleagues, because these are relationships of mutuality and friendship, and I think that begins to break down some barriers. And there again, I think some other things are specific to the nature of different organizations and settings, but I think the genuine relationship is one. And then I would say another is creating an environment where the relationships don't just start and end with either the employment relationship or a project or team. The healthiest organizational spaces I've been in are spaces where there is some sort of a revolving door. I can think of plenty of environments where there's been someone who, like we talked about the time that Roy and I shared, at Morehouse in Atlanta, for example. It's an environment where there are constantly people coming in and out who were current students, former students, alums, people who are connected to the institution in different ways, volunteers who become employees who come back as volunteers. And so this mutual and generous circle where there are not rigid boxes or categories for people, and once someone has become typecast in a box, they're unable to move the relationship, I think is a key area of import for any organization that's trying to do this.
That's great. And you touched maybe a little bit on this already, but given a lot of people on the call, our president's question came in just about what charge you might give to us as an LF global network being attentive and active to address these inequities.
Certainly. I would say, one, this conversation around reconciliation and relationality and building genuine relationships is critical work. It's good work, but it's not enough. I think one of the challenges is we tend to group ourselves in two camps. And so you have those who put time, energy, and effort on the interpersonal, the relational, and say that's going to be what solves this problem and what heals the world. And then you have those who focus on, the systemic, the structural, the policy, the meta issues, and say those are what's going to be what solves the world. And you have this perpetual polarization and tension between head and heart, between systems and relationships. And so my charge would be to continue to lean in to the tension between those poles, between what we would call in Christian theology, the tension between the already and the not yet, and resist the urge to plant your stake on one side or the other, but recognize that it is a creative tension, and that's when we have people who are pushing us on both sides, and when we're working to both ends, that's where the magic happens, is in that middle.
Thank you. Man, they took my question, Ernest. That's what I was going to ask you. It's like, man, great question, whoever asked that one. Golly. And so, well, Ernest, I do want to say thank you. And I want to pick your brain, because one of the things, like, I've been around Dave for quite some time. And so one of the people that I was privy to hearing live was Tom Skinner, who really pushed me to always be thinking about Indigenous leadership. And so those conversations I was listening to with him were in the mid-'80s, and we're still here having this conversation. When I look at the landscape of leadership in some broader circles, we're still having this conversation. And so I do see us as a network as trying to really be catalyst. I don't think we're the only answer, but we definitely want to do our part. And so I'd love to have some more conversations so that we can really, because I'm going to leave here, I'm going to leave this earth, but I don't want my grandchildren having this conversation. I mean, we can't afford that, especially with the, with our world going to look different here in the next 30 years. And so, thank you. Definitely want to live in that tension, and so we'll have you back. And so, good job, bro. Good job.
Thank you. I appreciate that, and I want to let those in the question period know that I see your questions, particularly Mike's question, and I think that we have to have more conversation, but this is a good starting point.
Yeah, man, it's good. Good job. Good job.
Thank you, Ernest.
Well, one of the things we always try to do is, how are we actually trying to live out our responses to what's going on in our world? And so today we'll get to hear from one of our newer presidents to the network, Nahshon Nicks. He has become the president of the First Coastal Leadership Foundation in Jacksonville, Florida. And so I'm really, really ecstatic to have Nahshon with us today. And so Nahshon, is he on camera? I can't see. I'm older. Is he on camera?
Nahshon, not yet. I'm right here. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you. There he is. Thank you, Pastor.
Okay.
Reverend, business owner.
Right.
Nahshon, I would love, one of the things we always want to hear from our presidents is kind of what's going on in the ground in light of COVID, school restarting, or maybe even what's happening in your community. So I'd love for you to share what's going on in Jacksonville.
First, thank you for this opportunity to be able to share what's going on in Jacksonville. And before COVID, during COVID, what God shared with me was that crisis reveals who you are at the core. And we had a lot of discrepancies pertaining to those, because Jacksonville is so beautiful, and we use Jacksonville is our Jerusalem. However, our murder rate, there's a difference between homicide and murder, but our murder rate has escalated to a point that is astronomical when you look at social distancing. So this crisis has highlighted social dysfunction. And I've attended funerals for Miss Gail Jinks, who was 68 years old. She was murdered in her front yard. I attended the homegoing service of Atara Mayo. Her nickname was Empress. She was stabbed to death by her mother. I attended the homegoing service of Tashawn Bossman Gallen, who was a 7-year-old who was shot and killed in his grandmother's front yard. So looking at COVID, it brings its own challenges pertaining to social distancing, hand washing, and health. But there is a social health issue that has been progressing within our community. So Jacksonville is our Jerusalem, and the scripture teaches us to pray for the peace of Jerusalem, and they shall prosper who love thee. So that's, to me, that's something that's like I said, we want jobs, we want people working, we want our people to live in livable conditions. We want them to have access to food, but we want them to live. We want them to live. We want our babies to live, and we want our elders to see the fruit of their labor. So that's a little bit what's going on in our city. And thank you for asking.
Thank you. Go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, well, Nahshon, always good to see you. And again, thanks for your service to Jacksonville. So maybe describe for us a bit of Jacksonville. I mean, we've got obviously people on the phone here from around the world, and people have, levels of understanding of who Jacksonville is and who Jacksonville isn't, but maybe give us a little bit of a picture of your city. And then within that, what is it about Jacksonville? You used the term already, but you love Jacksonville. She is your Jerusalem. What particularly do you love about Jacksonville that makes her your Jerusalem?
All right. When you think of Jerusalem, flying into Tel Aviv, You see people of multiple nationalities, almost like the day of Pentecost. You see people of multiple languages. I went to Jerusalem back in 2004 in Israel, and like I said, you can hear about 5 or 6 different languages, but there is it's a city that looks like the globe because you got tourists coming in and out, and Jacksonville is like a tourist city. Jacksonville is a port city. So you got CSX, you got the international airport, you got 2 major highways that can take you north, south, and east and west throughout the entire nation, which is I-10, which starts in LA and ends in Duval or Jacksonville. You got I-95, which goes from Canada to Miami, which intersects in Jacksonville. And so it has so much potential from an economic standpoint, and has so much potential from an education standpoint. But the pain point is the average adult only has what you will call a certificate of completion, Dave, which means they don't have a standardized high school diploma. So our city, when you look at executive management and executive leadership, they typically bring people, I'm using the term outsiders. You bring in people from the outside in versus developing from the inside out. And all of our executive leadership throughout our entire city is somebody from somewhere else. There is no representation of what we did great as a city. And that, like I said, that's a pain point and it's an opportunity. So that's where I'm at. Like I said, there's no way that we're going to ever reach the prosperity if the education doesn't match. So and that's just kind of like a snippet of our city, but it's so much potential. It's so much potential. And we got the beach.
Well, that was so beautifully said. You got me up here in the Northwest thinking, man, I'm thinking about moving to Jacksonville. So that was excellent.
No, man, that's really good, Nahshon. And man, I'd love, again, I'm so glad. Tell people a little bit about the work that the foundation is doing there in the city.
Well, I got to give a shout out to our founders who helped bring the First Coast Leadership Foundation to Jacksonville. That's Reverend Peter Church, who's deceased last year, and the Right Reverend R.O. Gundy. We're basically shifting, and if you haven't read it, it's mandatory that you read this. And what they were able to do by basically starting that pyramid with Run to Great Purpose and up in the pyramid, we have basically shifted and opening that pyramid to building on strengths, raising the bar and blazing the trail. And we've incorporated our core initiatives based on the will of change to where seeking leaders of goodwill and good faith and plugging that into like civic engagement and accountability. Then going into joint initiatives, looking at how we can help build capacity for other organizations. And we just had a great MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with Employ You, which pays teenagers and young adults to help us build awareness in the city of Jacksonville of what the First Coast Leadership Foundation is all about. And then looking at building capacity and joint initiatives, we also just did an MOU with Hands and Feet, which specializes in rehabilitation, the opioid crisis, because Jacksonville has so much highway, not trying to be funny, but there are truck drivers, solicitation, prostitution, opioids. When you got that, when you got those corridors of major highway traffic, there's so many overdoses. And like I said, we're able to work with an organization that already has those relationships with rehab centers, and we're fired up about it. So we're going to be able to help people in the urban core where we're located in Health Zone 1 and bridge that gap with Hands and Feet to help our people get that detox. And it's typically a 24-hour turnaround from the time someone says that they want to be delivered or healed or set free from this to where you got to get them into somewhere where they can get those services and treatment. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that's what I'm fired up about.
Well, man, look, first, hey, man, you are fired up. And one of the things that, just on the sidebar, I would love for you to make sure you send to Carrie, me, I know you sent in a text, the clip that you did on the news of you. That was a great highlight. Again, even when you mentioned, battlegrounds to playgrounds, I said, man, go on, Nahshon, do that thing, bro. I'm really just proud of the work that you're doing there in the city. Hey, let me ask you this. How can we be praying for you and the great work you're doing there on I-10 and I-95?
Great question. And I got to get, yes, that's what we say. We say, Duval. Well, the Jaguars say it too. We like to say it when they win. So, but pertaining to prayer, I believe that everybody is a leader. So when I say pray for our leadership team, that's not just the CEO. That's everybody on our team. Everybody is a leader. Our staff, employees, partners, and families, because people go back home to their families. And so we want to keep our team and our families in prayer. Another thing is, as Jacksonville is our Jerusalem, we needed Nehemiah to build the wall, and we needed Ezra to build the temple. So that's the spiritual with Ezra and the social with Nehemiah. And we're praying for folks of like minds to see this and want to join in. Like, that's how we build a community, And so we need the right people, right place, right time. And then I'm going to read Carpenter. We got some great ideas, Cornelius, but we need access to authority, and we need access to that power so we can move this needle forward. And just praying for the network as a whole, because we're all interconnected and interwoven. And we're constantly trying to find ways to make what we're already doing better based on these type of town halls, the president's training. And like I said, it's so much gleaning of information. And I don't want any of it to escape my ears, and that, like I said, so I'm really trying to take what I learned from you all back to our team so that they can see the greater impact.
And again, Dave and I, Nahshon, have spoken about you, and we are just so grateful for you and your leadership and, your time with us, bro. Man, you had an idea, man. It just warms our heart. It's like, okay, come on, let's keep at this. Let's keep at this. And for those who brought that first closer there, and shout out to Jacksonville. I tried to text Corey. I think Corey Williams, who's the president of Savannah Leadership Foundation, is actually from Jacksonville. Isn't that right?
Now,
Corey,
he better say yes. He better say yes.
Man, look, I think so. And so, Corey, you need to give a shout out one day to what's going on in Jacksonville. One got away, but you produced one that's transforming cities. So, as the Bible does say, it doesn't stop in Jerusalem, but Judea, Samaria, and the othermost parts of the world. So, praise the Lord for the great work in Jacksonville. So, Nahshon, hey, just want to say thank you so much, man. Keep up the good work. I'm glad you love your city and that you love God and you love the people that you're serving with, man. It will become that playground because of people like you. So man, appreciate you, bro. Appreciate you, bro. Hey, let's we're going to have an update real quick and hear from Eric Geary from our activation fund.
Glad to. Thanks for holding up that book from John Stallworth. It makes me think there are some other books that are in the LF library that I thought I would hold up as well. One by our own Dr. Dave Hillis, Cities as Playgrounds. That's a must read. There's another one here written by a gentleman in Lexington called Loudership. That was written, there's no doctor in front of that name. Small book, you can read it. And then Dr. Larry Lloyd from Memphis wrote a book, but it's actually propped up under my table, holding my table solid, so I can't pull that one out right now. Just kidding. Much love to that stalwart work. Quite honestly, it is very shaping to our movement. So I'll give a quick activation update. I'm so thankful that we get to be on this call and for our distinguished guests, and really, really happy to be in this with you all across our network across the world. So it was back in March, of course, we all know, when the coronavirus first popped up, and we started making a response from leadership foundations in our cities across the world. Out of the central office, the global office, emerged an idea of trying to collect the impact that was going on in response to COVID. So pretty immediately, we turned our attention in cities. Everybody on this call working a local leadership foundation pretty much did the same thing. To use the buzzword, we all pivoted, right? And started delivering meals to folks and handling groceries and helping with rent. And that was called our relief phase of the activation. And there's been some incredible relief responses throughout our network. We also knew that we would move into, and what's what we feel like we're at right now, a rebuild phase. Beyond relief, what does it mean to start reshaping some of the constructs of society, specifically with the broken and marginalized, that would help them get out of some of the distress that this caused and is causing. And then we also, the third R that we were working toward is the idea of rehabilitation, building a long-term structure in our cities from battlegrounds to playgrounds, that we could see life and abundance and thriving and equity. And if that could be birthed out of our COVID response, we felt like that the Leadership Foundations would be doing the good work that we've all been called to do. Specifically, one of the things we tried to do from the global office was raise some money in those three phases. The first relief phase, we were able to raise and distribute around $250,000 to local leadership foundations. And we hope to continue to do that for the good relief efforts. In fact, one of the things that we've done as kind of almost a requirement for our local leadership foundations to receive relief funding, little small subawards, small grants, is to provide us some data and on what you're doing in your relief response. So I wanted just to make everybody aware that that's coming out again, our third installment of that. We're just continuing to aggregate the material that you provide to us in these short, probably take you 10 minutes to click on this link. We hope you'll do it by the end of October. Because it's really important information as we share with potential donors and stakeholders in our relief work. So look for that coming out, and we really appreciate we've had I think right at 100% response on those. It is, if we're able to raise some more dollars and distribute more awards this year, it is just a requirement for every local leadership foundation to get that done. So we hope you'll do that. The rebuild phase is actually starting to establish some steam. So most of you probably read or heard that Leadership Foundations just received a Lilly grant. Noah Basket led the charge on this from the global office. And it's specifically focused on the Charity to Change model. There'll be more info coming out about that, but really part of the rebuild and even into the rehabilitate phases of our work in our COVID response. And we've raised some additional money in rebuild through long-term commitments that we think will help stabilize and grow the network and our work. So total, we can say with that and Lilly, it's about 1.75 million that has been graciously responded to from foundations, individual donors, and others to move this forward. So that's the current spot we're in the activation fund. We continue to look for stories from folks of what you're doing on the ground. We've received some incredible videos and pictures and short stories of just how powerful this network is if we're all focused on one thing. So look forward to hearing from any of you all. Questions, you can reach out to me or to Debbie Commodore. We kind of co-lead this effort around the activation fund and the response. And you can also visit the impact.leadershipfoundations.org just to see how we're progressing. So that's it for me, Corn.
Thanks, D. Good work, bro. Dave?
Yeah, real quickly, everybody. One of the people whose shoulders we stand on that has been referenced here at the town hall over the last few months has been, of course, Dr. Ray Bakke. I've oftentimes said that where Reed had the great idea, he had the inspiration to get on the streets and begin to do something on behalf of a city becoming a playground rather than a battleground. It was really Ray that came in behind Reed and said, hey, there's a theological motif here by which you are doing the work that you're doing. In many ways, we wouldn't have an LF network today apart from, of course, Reed Carpenter and Ray Bakke. Over the last couple of months, I have been in communication with Ray, where he has, for the last 5 or 6 years, been the primary caretaker of his wife, Corinne, who has been suffering from dementia. I'm here about 4 weeks ago. He had also been experiencing a pain in his hip, went into the doctor and discovered that he has a significant case of bone cancer. On top of all of that, his son Woody, who had also moved into their house to kind of help with the caretaking, discovered that he has colon cancer. So to say that the Bakke family is under a kind of duress right now might be the great understatement of the world. Because of the importance of Ray to the LF network, of course, I ask you all to have and hold the Bakke family in your prayers. But secondly, we really decided, and this was inspired by Eric Geary, whether or not maybe a love gift could be given to the Bakke family to deal with some of the medical issues that they are facing. So I wanted to give you a heads up that you will be getting a communique from me here probably in the next day, requesting an opportunity to provide some kind of resource for Ray and Corinne and Woody moving forward. There will be a link to our website that will help you expedite that process. And again, no pressure in doing this, but I think with Ray being really a part of the LF family, this is just something that I think God would have us do. So be looking for that email.
Thank you, Dave. Thank you. And thank you all again for being with us today. I'm going to ask, before I ask Dave to close out in prayer, just want to make you aware that we will be back again next week for our town hall, and we'll thank you very much. I appreciate that. We'll hear from Reverend Lucas Johnson next week, and then we'll have Bill Milliken after that, and have some other great people. We'll also share a little bit about what's going on with our website, kind of some town halls, and some of the exciting things that are happening also through the CCIC. So we are so grateful to be back. Dave, it's good to be back with you. And learning. I really appreciate that. If you don't mind, if you could just say a brief word of prayer and just close us out, and we'll let people go back to the great work they're doing in their cities.
Absolutely. God, our hearts are full with regard to the feast that you put before us by way of Ernest and Nahshon. Thank you that you have called us to this great idea of seeing the cities of this world become playgrounds rather than battlegrounds. God, give us what you ask of us in order to make that reality true, and then ask us what you will. And we pray all of this in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thank y'all, everyone. You have a wonderful day.